forgot an announcement, as is my habit, doing just about every week, but thankfully Henry reminded me that today is Kids Zone. And so during the message, the kids get to go downstairs for a Bible lesson. So if you're a kid and you want to go to Kids Zone, now is your time to make your escape and head downstairs. I'm going to make an admission that will date me a little bit as a youngster. I have never not had a car with cruise control. I've never had to live without cruise control. I've had some work trucks without it, but I usually didn't have to take those very far. But all the cars I've ever owned have had cruise control. Even my very first car that I learned to drive on, the one that I had when I turned 16, had cruise control, even though it may not look like it from the outside. Would you like to see the first car I drove? Because it is a beauty. It is worth seeing, okay? I should turn on my clicker to show it to you, but here it is in all of its beauty. Joel's 1985 Chrysler New Yorker. Corinthian leather seats, okay? You see there, the wheels don't match. There's a pretty good dent in the side. But it ran most of the time. Had a lot of fun with this car. I don't know anything about engines, but I had a broken battery mount in this car for a while, so the battery would slide when I turned right. So I had a course mapped out. When it slid, it would pull the connector. The battery would disconnect, the engine would shut off. And so I figured out a course to school that was all left turns. But I had a great time in this car. And my twin sister and I had to share it. And this is how ridiculous my twin sister is. She was upset when I wrecked it. I deserve a thank you card or something, some great act of appreciation for wrecking this car so that we could move on. But it had cruise control. Just this little, it's like a slide on the turn signal there on the left side of the steering wheel. You could have cruise control there in this 1985 Chrysler New Yorker. And cruise control is fantastic, isn't it? I use mine all the time. V16, I only have 3 miles to the highway, and I'll put it on there. And if I don't put it on V16, then I'll go 80 miles an hour past Julie's house. And she's thinking, well, you must not use it very often because that's about how fast I see you driving. No, I do use cruise control a whole lot. And it's great. You get to relax a little bit while you're driving. Something you just don't have to think about is how hard to push the accelerator. And in theory, it should keep you from getting speeding tickets, right? That's how it's supposed to work, even though I've disproven this theory a number of times in my life. And when you're on long trips on the interstate, it can be frustrating to have to turn off your cruise control, to have to brake, right? Because you're just cruising down the interstate, and say if you want to go to, you're going a long ways away, and you have to keep turning off your cruise control on the interstate. That's really frustrating because somebody's going slow in the left lane, or they've got you trapped behind a slow car. Whoever does that, they usually have Missouri tags, right? or Polk County, that's the other one, right? They're always going slow in the left lane.
Are you sure we're going to have words again?
Yeah, BK, you heard me say it. The left lane is for passing, okay? Please let all your friends down there know next time you go visit. But life is just easier with cruise control. And I wonder if that was true for Elijah. Elijah, if you may remember, he is a prophet of God, and he was called to confront King Ahab of Israel. Even though Ahab was an immensely successful king and the son of an immensely successful king for Israel, and Israel was at the height of its economic and military power, he was sent to tell Ahab that God was bringing a drought because of their idolatry. And then Elijah had to leave, to go hide for a while, because if Ahab would have found him, Ahab would have killed him. So he goes and hides by this brook. He's fed by ravens, and then the brook dries up. He has to go to Zarephath, clear up by Tyre and Sidon, and lives with a widow for many years. For 3.5 years is how long the drought goes on for. And he was just there living, he and the widow. And they had some tough times out there. It was hard at the beginning because there was a drought to trust God to provide food for them. And then the widow's son died, but Elijah brought him back to life. But you can imagine life getting a little comfortable there. Every day, the jar of oil would be filled, and they would have enough flour to make bread, and Elijah could just get by, and he was safe up there. Ahab wasn't going to find him in Zarephath. But one day, that had to come to an end for Elijah. Life probably wasn't what Elijah imagined in Zarephath. That's not what he wanted out of his life, is to be living there and doing that. But it was going just fine for him. He was cruising. That's the way life works a lot in my experience. There are a lot of times when I don't end up quite in the place I imagined or doing what I imagined I would be doing, but you find a place that is comfortable and you can just kind of cruise, and that's not a bad place to be. That's where Elijah was. And this is true until we get to 1 Kings chapter 18, starting in verse 1, where we'll be reading from this morning. Because Elijah's relatively comfortable, though probably inconvenient life of living in Zarephath with this widow has to come to an end. The many years that he spent doing this is over, and in 1 Kings 18, verse 1, it says, "After many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, 'Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth.'" See, what happened there is Elijah just got cut off on the interstate. He had to break. The cruise control time is over. And the years he spent being fed miraculously by God and hiding from Ahab for his safety are over. And now he has to go do something very difficult. He has to go confront the king who is practicing idolatry in Israel, the king who hates him, the king that would like to kill him. But Elijah's going to go do this, and in verse 2 it says, "So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab." But before Elijah gets there, before Elijah confronts Ahab in Samaria, we're going to get introduced to a new character. And we'll see him as we read along here. As we finish up verse 2, it says, "Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, and when Jezebel cut off the prophets," Jezebel is Ahab's wife, a Sidonian who led Israel in idolatry, "and when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave, and fed them with bread and water. And Ahab said to Obadiah, 'Go through the land to all the springs of water and all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive, and not lose some of the animals.' So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself." Okay, so Ahab and Obadiah are working together. Obadiah is a servant in Ahab's kingdom, but Obadiah is faithful to the Lord. And so when Ahab and Jezebel make a move against God's prophets and have them all killed, is what that means, Obadiah helps 100 of them hide. He divides them up into 2 groups, and he hides them in caves. And so Obadiah is not just a faithful man, but he's actively working to preserve the worship of the Lord in Israel and working against his idolatrous king, Ahab, who he's also serving as part of his court. Now see what Ahab and Obadiah have to do. Because of the drought that Elijah announced, Ahab and Obadiah have to go look for grass. One of the impressive things about Ahab's kingdom and Omri, his father before him, is they had horses and chariots in a number that Israel had not had before. One of the impressive things, the reason we know that their kingdom was great, is because of an inscription we found around Dan in the very northern edge of Israel that said that Ahab contributed 2,000 chariots to a battle to confront the king of Assyria. And so Ahab has a lot of horses to feed, a lot of livestock that he needs to keep alive during this drought. So he and Obadiah, his chief official, are going to go look for grass. And this is kind of a funny thing to see Ahab doing, because Ahab and his father are really powerful kings, and they have great building projects in Samaria and Gaza. And here he is looking for grass. Here he is. He has some of the most monumental buildings in the Holy Land from this age, from the Iron Age, and they have to look for grass. That's what he's spending his time doing. So Ahab has been humbled. He's been lowered here. And Obadiah is faithful to God, but he's also in sort of in a cruise control. Because Obadiah is serving a king that is idolatrous and that does not have God's favor. So even though Obadiah is faithful, and even though Obadiah did something really good, which is to protect 100 of the Lord's prophets, when Ahab and Jezebel tried to kill them, Obadiah is still serving this evil king. There's still a big problem in Obadiah's life that he is not confronting, that he is not addressing. And when Elijah comes down from Zarephath, because God told him to, in chapter 18, verse 1, he does not run in to Ahab first. He runs into Obadiah. In verse 7, we read, "And as Obadiah was on the way, looking for grass, behold, Elijah met him. And Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, 'Is it you, my lord Elijah?' And he answered him, 'It is I. Go tell your lord, behold, Elijah is here.'" Okay? Now Obadiah just got cut off on the interstate. And it's time for Obadiah's cruise control to stop. He's going to have to do something about this big problem, this huge looming ordeal in his life that he's just been cruising through, that he's just been dealing with and getting by with. It's time for Obadiah to stop cruising too. But look at Obadiah's response when Elijah tells him to go tell Ahab that he's here. The response comes in verse 9. It says, "And he said, 'How have I sinned that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent to seek you.' And when they would say, 'He is not here,' he would take an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you. And now you say, 'Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here.' And as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you I know not where. And so when I come and tell Ahab he cannot find you, he will kill me. Although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth, has it not been told my Lord what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, how I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water? And now you say, 'Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here,' and he will kill me." Okay, Obadiah is resistant to giving up his cruise control comfort. Obadiah is in a pretty comfortable place, and he's getting by just fine, and this is going to mess it up, and he doesn't want to. I want you to see how Obadiah's argument worked. First of all, Obadiah is afraid that Elijah will just disappear when he goes and tells Ahab that Elijah is here. Okay, so that's one problem, and as we already saw, Elijah disappeared once already and hasn't been found, so it's a pretty valid concern. Right? God just disappears prophets sometimes. It happens to Jeremiah. It happens to Philip in Acts. And God will just take them other places. So Obadiah is afraid about that. But I also want to see how Obadiah's argument takes shape. Notice that he makes an appeal to the fact that he saved the prophets of God when Jezebel was killing them. Part of Obadiah's argument for why he shouldn't have to do this is that he has done some good things already. His argument is that he's done some good things. He should be left alone. Look at me. I protected some of the Lord's prophets, and now you want me to do something hard again? Now you're picking on me to go tell Ahab that you're here and risk my life? Obadiah's argument is that he shouldn't have to deal with this big problem in his life. He shouldn't have to be the one to deal with this problem of Israel's idolatrous king. After all, it wasn't his fault that the drought came. It wasn't his fault that Israel wandered away into idolatry under Ahab and Jezebel. And Obadiah's involvement here doesn't seem super necessary, does it? Why does Elijah tell Obadiah to go tell Ahab? Why doesn't Elijah just go himself? Ultimately, Obadiah would like to watch from the sidelines. He'd like to not be a part of solving this big problem. He's cruising and life is fine. He's a pretty important guy in the kingdom of Israel. He's a chief official for Ahab. And he would like to sit this one out. Isn't Obadiah's argument tempting? Haven't you thought that before? I have. look, God, I've already done this good thing. Can you just leave me alone? Have you ever found yourself in Obadiah's position? Being called upon in a situation that maybe you don't want to volunteer for or don't want to be a part of, and knowing that there's something that you need to do the right thing, and just wanting to sit it out. When things aren't right in your life, where there are some big problems hovering over your head, sometimes we can find a routine that feels comfortable enough that we can just get by. And that's what Elijah was doing for 3.5 years. That's what Obadiah was doing here in Ahab's kingdom. Things weren't right in their life. There was a big problem, Israel's idolatry and God's displeasure with them. But they had found a routine within that was comfortable. They could get by. They could just keep doing this thing over and over each day, and it was enough. Sometimes it's easier just to put your head down, to keep punching that time clock and ignore giant problems. But Jesus spoke these words in the Sermon on the Mount about a life of faith and what it looks like. When he spoke to his followers there, he said, "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden, neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." You need to see that staying out of the way is not going to work for us. The staying on the sidelines, like Obadiah would wish to do here in this conversation with Elijah, is not going to work. The life that you and I are called to live in God's kingdom is going to put us in contrast with the way that the world lives. It's going to often put us in contrast with the way that our neighbors live, with the way that our family wants to live. And just putting our head down and getting by is not how we're called to respond. It's not how we're called to engage with our sinful world. Ultimately, Obadiah will do the right thing, because Elijah reassures him in verse 15 that he is not going to disappear. He makes that promise. In verse 15, Elijah says, "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to Ahab today." So Obadiah does what is right. He takes his life out of cruise control in verse 16 and says, "So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah." So ultimately, Obadiah, even though he's resistant and even though he complains a little bit and tries to make an argument for why he shouldn't have to be bothered by this, does the right thing. He goes and tells Ahab, his king, that Elijah, the man that announced the drought, the man that is holding back the rain from Ahab's kingdom, is here. And Ahab went to meet Elijah. So Obadiah and Ahab are tackling this task together, and then this is the conversation that Elijah and Ahab have. In verse 17, it says, when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" And he answered, this is Elijah speaking now, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." You see, Israel's sin and Ahab's sin needed to be confronted. Elijah had to meet Ahab and confront his sin, to intervene on behalf of the people of Israel. Obadiah found himself caught up in the situation, and he too had to leave his comfortable existence, his comfortable life, had to take it out of cruise control to deal with this big problem. God did not want Elijah and Obadiah to keep their heads down and just keep getting through it. He wanted them to speak up. There came a time when they needed to break their comfortable rhythm and to take their lives out of cruise control and to deal with the really big issue. And when you hear this story this morning, I want you to ask yourself if there's something like that you've been putting off. Cruise control is often a good thing, especially at times when we're in crisis, right? When somebody's in crisis, my advice to them and counsel them as a friend a lot of times is just to find a habit or a daily routine where you can do some good and just get through it for a while. But it's not a place where we're supposed to stay. That's a kind of therapeutic existence for us, but there is a time in life where we have to take on the big challenges that we face, the big problems that exist in our life. We have to have the hard conversations, and it probably looks different for each of us as to what those big problems are or what those big issues are that we need to resolve. But if you are like me, there are plenty of tasks and decisions and conversations that I know I need to do or have. And there are things that don't get done because I'm living life in cruise control. And it's hard for me to speak about because I'm personally really bad about picking smaller, less important tasks so that I can still feel productive and busy while I ignore some really important things in my life that are looming in the background. Are you guys like me on that? I'm a natural procrastinator, but this is something I do very badly. But there are often times in life where you can't just stay in cruise control. You have to do something about the problem that is looming over you, where you have to take a step forward and deal with it. You can't just keep getting by. What might that look like for you? It could be a recurring sin in life that you need to address, maybe tell somebody about, so that you can confess and have some accountability for. It could be a decision about faith that you've been putting off, just not talking to anyone about. Maybe a decision to be baptized or finding a way to serve in the church or joining a Sunday school class or a Bible study that you know you should probably do sometime, but you just don't want to take life out of cruise control to do it. It could be a conversation with a family member or friend that you know you need to have that you've just been putting off. That's the situation Elijah and Obadiah faced. They had to go have a really hard conversation with somebody who didn't want to hear what they had to say, and that's what they had to do. That's what knocked their life out of cruise control. That's a really important thing that God set before them that they had to be willing to do. And it's a big one for me, too. There's so many conversations that I need to have, but they aren't going to happen when you're in cruise control because they're not very comfortable. And sometimes it can be hard to take that step in life and to make that decision, to talk to that person, or to have the conversation with a person that you talk to all the time about something really important that you've been thinking about or that they need to hear. It could look like decisions about work or decisions about a relationship or a lifestyle change that you need to make that you've been putting off. If your life is anything like mine, there's a pretty good list of things that you're putting off because they don't fit into your comfortable routine, because they don't fit into cruise control, and you don't want to spoil it. I'm right there with you. But this morning, we've read the story of Elijah and Obadiah breaking their routine. We've read the story of Elijah and Obadiah being told by God to go confront Ahab in his sin and to go do something about it. And they had to leave their comfortable life. They had to leave their routine. They had to hit the brake and change what was going on. And it was a risk for them. It was a risk, and it definitely made them uncomfortable. And for them, it was dangerous even to their life. They left their comfortable existence that they had settled into, and they faced the giant problem in their life head on. That's exactly what God wanted them to do. Don't you think it's what He wants you and I to do as well? This morning, I want you to think about hitting the brake on your cruise control, on seeing the problems that you've been living with, the conversations you've been avoiding, or the problems that you just haven't want to deal with. And let's tap the brakes. Let's identify those decisions and conversations and changes that have been looming over us and face them with the courage of Elijah. Elijah was willing and ready when God said, hey, go confront Ahab. Elijah left Zarephath and he said, okay, let's do it. Maybe even if you just have the courage of Obadiah, who, when he was told he needed to go talk to Ahab, complained about it a little bit, but he went and did it anyway. That'd be fine. We'd settle for that. Okay? But the faith of Elijah and Ahab allowed them to break their comfortable existence, to break their comfortable routine, and to confront the challenge in life that they were facing. To have the difficult conversation that they needed to have with Ahab. To intervene on behalf of Israel, their people, so that they could live in a way that pleases God. If you're like me, there are plenty of those situations in your life that you've been putting off, that you've been cruising past on the highway. Let's tackle them together. Let's take this morning to hear the story of Elijah and Obadiah and go confront those giant problems in our life. Go confront the bigger issue that we've just been getting through. There's a verse in Ephesians 6, starting in verse 10. It says, "Finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes." We have strength in Jesus Christ. Your faith gives you strength. The Holy Spirit inside you gives you strength, and you are able and ready to confront these challenges that you face. And there is a time in your life, and it may be this morning, when you need to get out of cruise control and deal with them like Elijah and Obadiah did here in 1 Kings chapter 18. Like Elijah, you have the Lord on your side, and his strength is behind you. So let's take a stand and let's sacrifice a little comfort and tackle the big things in life that we've been putting off. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, give us clear eyes and the wisdom that it takes to see the problems that we've just been getting by with. Dear Heavenly Father, give us the courage to confront them. Dear God, give us the courage to have the conversations that we need to have. Either to do things like offer forgiveness, to do things like share our faith, or to confront sin. God, give us that strength. Help us to tackle these problems with you on our side so that we can do better than just get by. Heavenly Father, we pray these things in your name. Amen.